time to love. With the emphasis Buddhists place on reflection, mindfulness, and wisdom, the holy life might sometimes seem to be an almost unfeeling attempt to look at everything in very objective ways. Rather than feel things, we're supposed to see everything as anicca, dukkha, and anatta. That's how it might seem. But remember that the heartfelt experience of life is a loving one, so love and devotion are not to be dismissed. If we're looking at the experience of love as just anicca, dukkha, and anatta, that might seem cold-hearted. Objectivity, however, is merely a way of having things in perspective, so that love is not something that blinds us. If we're attached to the idea of love, we can be quite blind to its reality. We can become very inspired by talking about it or meditating on it, seeking it in others, demanding it, or feeling somehow left out. But what is love in terms of our lives as we live them? On an emotional plane, you might want to have feelings of tremendous oneness, or maybe aim the feelings at some particular person, wanting to have a special loving relationship with another person. Or love can be abstract, love of all human beings, love of all beings, love of God, love of something or some concept. Devotion is from the heart. It's not a rational thing. You cannot make yourself feel love or devotion just because you like the idea of it. It's when you're not attached, when your heart is open, receptive, and free, that you begin to experience what pure love is. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, the realm of the divine abodes, the Brahmaviharas, these come from an empty mind, not from a sterile position of just annihilating feeling, but from a heart that's not deluded, not blinded by ideas of self or others, or by passion of some kind or another. You may think the holy life is cold and heartless, because in a community of samanas such as this, living according to a way of restraint and discipline, we're not demonstrative in our expressions of love and joy. This community doesn't bubble with feelings of devotion. It's quite formal and restrained in its form and expression. But this doesn't necessarily deny love. With mindfulness, with the way we relate, to our bodies, to the Sangha, to the lay people, to the tradition, to society, there's openness, kindness, and receptivity. There's caring, a joyfulness, and compassion that we can feel. It's still anicca and anatta, and it's dukkha, in the sense that it's not in itself the end of anything. It's not satisfying as an identity or an attachment. But when the heart is free from illusions of self, a loving quality arises in the pure joy of being. It's not expected to be anything or anybody, nor is it expected to last or to be permanent. It's not to be made into anything. It's just the natural way of things. So when you contemplate in that way, that's the way of faith and trust and devotion. Faith, confidence, and trust are nothing you can really grasp. Faith isn't anything that you can create. You can say the words, but really to have faith and confidence in Dhamma is to be willing to let go of any demand or affirmation or any attachment whatsoever. And that experience of faith comes to us as we examine and understand the Dhamma, or the true way of things. If we really contemplate Dhamma, see Dhamma, then there's faith, this strong sense of total trust, confidence in truth. If you're practicing vipassana meditation and becoming more frightened, anxious, or tense, or feeling emotionally sterilized, you're not doing it the right way. Perhaps you're using a technique as a way of suppressing your feelings or denying things, so you end up feeling more tense, more skeptical, more uncertain. There's an attachment to some view about it. The more we really see and completely understand the way things are, the more we have this quality of faith. Faith increases, it's total trust. When one talks about surrender, giving up or letting go, it's through total trust. It's not just taking a chance or a risk, it's through the experience of faith. The path is something we cultivate. We have to know where we are and not try to become something that we think we'd like to be. We have to practice with the way it is now, without making a judgment about it. If you're feeling tense, nervous, disillusioned, disappointed about yourself, the tradition, the teacher, the monks or nuns or whatever, try to recognize that what's in the moment is enough. Be willing just to admit, to acknowledge the way it is, rather than indulging in believing what you're feeling is an accurate description of reality, or thinking that what you're feeling's wrong and you shouldn't be feeling like that. Those are two extremes. But the cultivation of the way is to recognize that whatever is subject to arising is subject to ceasing. And this isn't a put down or a cold-hearted way of cultivating the path, even though it might sound like it. You might think you just have to let go of all your feelings and see that the love in your heart is just anicca, dukkha, anatta. You feel love for the Buddha and you think, that's just anicca, dukkha, anatta, that's all it is. You feel love for the teacher and you think, just anicca, dukkha, anatta, don't get attached to the teacher. You feel love for the tradition, anicca, dukkha, anatta, don't get attached to traditions or techniques. Not getting attached to anything can be merely a way of suppressing everything. It's not necessarily letting go or non-attachment. It can be merely a position you take. And if you take that position and operate from it, all you're going to feel is negativity and stress. You shouldn't be attached to anything. You shouldn't love anything. You shouldn't feel anything. Feeling anything is just anicca, dukkha, anatta. That means you're taking the words and using them on your mind like a bludgeon, a big club. You're not reflecting, watching, observing, opening, trusting. Metta practice, loving kindness, is one of the beautiful devotional practices that are highly recommended in Buddha Dhamma. As human beings, we're warm-blooded creatures. We do feel love. It's part of our humanity. We like each other. We like to be with other people. We like to be kind. We find enjoyment in cooking food and giving it to other people. We enjoy helping. You can see that with the custom of dana, generosity in the Asian communities. When Sri Lankan people come here with their curries, they light up with the joy of giving. That's a very good quality. It's beautiful to see somebody who maybe has been up all night preparing delicious food to offer to somebody else. They're not cooking it for themselves. Well, what is that as a human experience? Is it defilement? Or is it being attached to feeling delight or happiness at doing things for others? This is the beauty of humanity. Just being able to love, to give, to share, to be generous. Try contemplating what the great delight of being the richest person in the world would be. What would be the truly delightful thing about that? To get what I want? No, it would be the opportunity to give it away. That would be the true delight of being rich and wealthy, so that you could give it away as dana. Whereas to be rich and not to be able to give it away would be a real burden. What a burden that would be, to be the richest man in the world and be selfish and hold on to all my wealth and keep it all to myself. The joy of wealth is in one's ability to share it and give it without any kind of corrupt intentions or selfish demands. So this is what's lovely about our humanity. We can experience this joy of giving. And it's something we all experience when we really give something, when we help somebody without any selfish request or demand for something in return. Then we experience joy. It's certainly a lovely human experience, but we don't expect it to make us joyful for the rest of our lives. The joy of generosity and kindness isn't permanent, doesn't make us permanently happy, but we don't expect it to. If we did, it wouldn't be dana any longer. It would be a deal we were making. It wouldn't be an act of generosity, it would be buying something. Real joy comes from giving, and not caring whether anyone even knows or acknowledges it. As soon as the self comes in, for example, I'm giving this dana to you, and it's very important that you know who's giving it. Me. I'm giving it. That amount of joy that comes from giving it is probably very minimal. If I'm so concerned about being recognized and appreciated, that you should appreciate my generosity and my goodness, that becomes a joyless state of mind. One cannot feel happy or have any real joyfulness in living if there's attachment to the idea that one's actions should be recognized. There's nothing wrong with people appreciating somebody else's goodness and generosity, but when we don't demand it, there's joy. Romantic love is usually based on the illusion of a self and a demand for something back. Spiritual love is altruistic love, or universal love, and is represented by the Brahma Viharas, metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. Such love is a unitive experience. It brings together, it unites, it's a communion. Hatred is the experience of separation. When we hate, there's no union, no communion, no oneness. Hatred is separative, divisive, discriminatory. Love is unitive, and we want unity because living in a world of hate, discrimination, and separation is a miserable hell realm. The community is a communion, a sangha, a whole. If we're divorced from the sangha, if we hate the sangha, hate this nun, hate that monk, and I don't like that, I don't like this, then it's not a community, it's a disunity. The feeling is one of alienation, separation, emphasizing me and you and your faults and my feelings and my anger at your faults. Or it can be my emphasizing the things that are wrong with you. Things that are wrong with the monks, with the nuns, with the anagarikas. Things that are wrong, full stop. And attaching to those perceptions will make me feel alienated, separated, angry, discontented, unhappy, depressed. Sometimes the mind will go into a very negative state where all you feel is annoyance. Nothing people do seems quite good enough. When you're in that mood, everything seems wrong. The cats, the sun, the moon. The mind goes into division, separation, and negativity. You feel separate from everything you see. And no communion or union is possible as long as you're identified with and attached to that attitude of mind. When you're in a loving mood, it doesn't really matter if somebody isn't feeling very good or isn't doing exactly what they should. There are always little things, little bits and pieces that aren't quite what they should be. But when you're in a loving mood, these things aren't so important. The loving experience comes because you're willing to overlook the personality differences and the discrimination that exists in the conditioned realm for the feeling of communion, of union and oneness. We unite as brothers and sisters in a common experience of old age, sickness, and death, rather than pointing out the differences or who is better than whom. When we take refuge in Sangha, we're taking refuge in Supatipano, those who have practiced well, Ujupatipano, those who have practiced directly, Nyayapatipano, those who have practiced insightfully, Samijipatipano, those who practice with integrity. Rather than taking refuge in Americans, British, Australians, or in men or women or nuns or monks, we take refuge in those who practice the Dhamma, in the good, the direct, and the sincere. We have tendencies towards both union and separation, and we can be mindfully aware of this. The way things are has to be recognized as Dhamma. There's uniting and there's separating. And with clear awareness, one doesn't identify with either extreme. There's a time for union, communion, a time for non-discrimination, for devotion, for gratitude, generosity, for joy. But there's also time for separation and discrimination, for examining what's wrong. There's a need to look at the flaws, to look at anger, jealousy, and fear, and to accept and understand those emotional experiences, rather than judging them and taking them as self and as something we shouldn't have. This is what being human is all about. We're born into a separate form, and yet we can unite. We can realize unity, community, oneness, but we can also discriminate. So refuge in the Buddha is the ability of a human being to recognize both sides and respond appropriately. We can look at the flaws and the problems of life as part of our human experience rather than in a personal way. Then we're no longer proliferating, nor are we magnifying or exalting, obsessed with what's wrong, because we have this perspective of unity and separation. This is the way things are, the Dhamma. Is being a Buddhist monk or a Buddhist nun a denial of love? Is the Vinaya merely discipline? Is the Vinaya discipline merely a means of suppressing feelings? It can be just that. We can use Vinaya discipline and monastic tradition as merely a way of avoiding things. Maybe the monks are just frightened of women. Maybe the nuns are petrified of men, so they become nuns and don't have to face their fears and anxieties with regard to relationships with men. Of course, many worldly people think like that. They think we're all here because of an inability to cope with the real world. But is that really how it is? If it is, if that's why you're a monk or nun, then you're in this way for the wrong reasons. It's not an instrument for avoiding reality and life, but for reflecting on them. Because in restraint and the dignity of restraint, the way of monasticism is an expression of love for all beings, men, women, both inside and outside. We no longer choose one person on whom to focus our attention and devotion, but we devote ourselves to all beings. I realize that if I were a family man, I'd have to give my whole attention to my wife, children, and immediate family. That's a result of family life and what marriage is about. They have priority. You have to relate to your marriage partner and those for whom you're responsible. Or one can be an alms mendicant and live on faith alone, on trust in the goodness and benevolence of other beings, because one feels love and respect for all beings. That love and respect are what generate the alms that sustain us in this life as alms mendicants. And the funny thing is that the power of the Buddhist Sangha is so strong that even if you personally hate all other beings, the alms still come in. The power of the robe seems to be so strong that even if you as an individual monk or nun hate everybody, you will still be fed by kind-hearted beings. This is because of the barami of the Buddha. That doesn't mean you should develop hatred or justify it in yourself in any way. Rather, it's a reflection on the power of a very skillful convention that was established by the Lord Buddha. When you appreciate that, you really feel love and trust. Why do these monasteries here in England work? Why should they work in a non-Buddhist country? Why should anybody want to mail a check, bring a sack of potatoes, or prepare a meal? Why should they bother? This is because of the barami of the Buddha. The goodness of the lifestyle he established generates generosity. The loving kindness, the compassion, and joy of the holy life reach out and open other people to that same experience. It's a mystery. From a practical, worldly attitude of justifying our existence in the eyes of society, We don't seem to do all that much for anyone. Many people think we just sit here and try to become enlightened for ourselves, have nice, pleasant mental states because we can't stand the real world. But the more you contemplate this life and understand it, the more you realize the power of the goodness, the faith, the barami of the Buddha, which allow communion to take place in an interconnection of goodness. It needn't be demonstrated, talked about and emphasized a lot. It speaks for itself. We don't have to go out telling people, you should give us alms because we're practicing the Dhamma and we're disciples of the Buddha. Our requisites are offered because people appreciate and respect the holy life. It brings joy and happiness into people's lives. Because we rejoice in the beauty of others and in the goodness and benevolence of this experience of living. So the holy life is actually a strange way to live. In terms of what we regard as reality according to our cultural conditioning, quite how it works is a mystery. But as Dhamma, as truth, as the way things are, it actually works. And this increases our faith and our trust in the refuges and in the beauty and goodness of our lives as samanas.